Throughout history, many objects remain mysterious, with their authenticity often in doubt. And in Portugal, many historians claim the famous sword of Dom Afonso Henriques, displayed at the Portuguese Museum and widely depicted, is actually a fake, a copy from the 16th century. So in this case, what happened to the sword of the founder of Portugal? There is clear evidence that the version on display is a forgery. Why would someone forge an item like that? And how did the disappearance of a simple sword directly affect the morale and hope of the people of Portugal? In today's video, we will reveal the secrets and contradictions surrounding the sword of Afonso Henriques, one of the most enigmatic objects in the history of Portugal. But before we start the video, if you like our content, become a member of our channel right now. That way, you'll have access to our group and exclusive content, including live classes. To dive even deeper into the behind the scenes of history, to grasp the significance of Dom Afonso Henriques' sword, one must first understand the importance of its bearer. Afonso Henriques, he was the first king of Portugal, starting the Burgundy dynasty and making the county of Portugal independent from the kingdom of Leon, being the son of Count Dom Henrique of Burgundy. With Teresa of Leon, orphaned by his father at age 3, he was raised apart from his mother by Iwegas. Muniz Afonso knighted himself, already showing his desire to be king, and later had to fight against his own mother in the Battle of São Amédio to prevent the county of Portugal from being annexed by the Galician noblemen with whom his mother was involved. And later, consolidating his rule, he would have waged an intense war against the Moors. Taking Lisbon with the help of the Crusader Knights, in fact, the Crusaders built a 25-meter tower, equivalent to the height of an 8-story building, to cross over the walls of Lisbon. And besides the conquest of Lisbon, Afonso also undertook many conquests in the Alentejo region, which would later be retaken by the Moors. Before his death, Afonso secured recognition of the Kingdom of Portugal from the Holy See and conquered vast territories, establishing himself not only as the founder of a kingdom and a dynasty, but also as one of the greatest crusader kings of the Iberian Peninsula. The chronicles of the time describe Afonso as a man about 2 meters tall, a true giant for that region. In the 12th century, descending from an important nobleman of Burgundy, he inherited the red hair and the robustness of his Norman ancestors. It's no wonder the Moors called him the Great Dog, in a mix of hatred and fear. But Afonso's greatness was not limited to his body. There was a mystical aura around his battles, which intensified many years later. As a warrior king, Afonso fought many battles against neighboring kingdoms and the Moors, but also, according to tradition, witnessed mystical experiences on the battlefield. Among them is the Battle of Sacavém, where, almost as if by a miracle, several knights are said to have appeared out of nowhere to help Afonso in his fight against the Moors in the conquest of Lisbon. And there's also the Battle of Henriques, where Afonso is said to have seen Christ himself prophesying not only the victory over the 5 Moorish kings, but also the very foundation of the Portuguese Empire. In the 1500s, during peak Portuguese nationalism, these accounts fueled a strong national desire for a crusade. But as the historian Jorge Alarcón recounts in his work, Memories of Coimbra, the story of Dom Afonso Henriques' sword began to stand out and gain a dark chapter, starting from the end of the 16th century. King Dom Sebastião, wishing to conquer Morocco for Christendom, organized his own crusade to North Africa in 1578. And for this endeavor, the young king asked for help. He borrowed the sword of his ancestor, Afonso Henriques, from the monks of the monastery of Santa Cruz in Coimbra to wield it in his crusade in Morocco. And the monks, perhaps naive, perhaps too devoted, supposedly accepted the idea. They believed that sword was not just a weapon, but a symbol capable of expanding the Lusitanian crusade. If Afonso Henriques had started the European reconquest and the Avis dynasty, Taken to the cross all the way to Africa, Sebastião believed he was destined to convert all of North Africa to Christianity, but the result was an absolute disaster. In Alcácer Quibir, under the scorching desert sun, the Portuguese faced an enemy 4 times larger. A large part of the nobility fell, and Dom Sebastião disappeared, and along with him, according to many, the sword of the founder of Portugal also vanished. But then the dilemma arises. If the sword was lost in the Moroccan desert, what is that piece on display at the Porto Military Museum? According to the monks of Coimbra, the sword there would be the true sword of Dom Afonso Henriques, since the sword was never taken to Alcácer Quibir. Well, Dom Sebastião simply forgot it in an annal, allowing it to be returned intact to the monastery and later to the Portuguese people. But many historians don't buy that version. Jorge Alarcón argues that the religious men made up the story to cover up the loss of the relic. And he's not alone. Professor Mario Barroca of the University of Porto analyzed the piece and found its features don't match the 12th century. In fact, it would have been forged between 1578 and 1609 precisely to replace the authentic one, which had already been lost. And there's one more intriguing detail. The sword in the museum looks much more like the so-called crab swords, typical of the 15th century and used during the Age of Discovery, than like medieval swords. Few contemporary depictions of Dom Afonso Henriques exist from the 12th century, his era. We have among the oldest the statue of the king, dating from the 13th century and present at the Carmo Archaeological Museum, and also the image of a king dating from the 12th century made of granite in the Church of São Pedro de Reis in Portugal. And what we can observe in both images is that the sword used by the sculptures is very different from the usual representations we have of the king's sword, whereas in the sculptures we have grand and similar swords, following the pattern of medieval swords. In the more recent iconographies of Dom Afonso Henriques, the sword has a very different shape, including the sword present in the older iconographies. It is similar to those of many later kings, like the case of Nodinese's sword, which was recently removed from his tomb, and to which we can see a pattern much more similar than the sword attributed to Dom Afonso Henriques. We see through much evidence that this is the sword Dom Afonso Henriques used to conquer the kingdom's lands. It would be very different from those shown in Roque Gamero's paintings, Dom Afonso Henriques' sculptures, and other references to the Portuguese king. Conversely, a 14th century document called the Compendium of Chronicles of Herreus depicts several Iberian kings, including those of Portugal. And there, Afonso is depicted with a sword similar to the one found in the Military Museum of Porto, thus showing that the sword present in the museum may be genuine. Or if it is false, it could be a replica made with the utmost fidelity to the original. So, in fact, all we have about this sword are theories. Above all, because the sword had great symbolism. For Portugal, in the context of the defeat at Alcácer Quibir, the defeat in the deserts of Morocco symbolized much more than just the disappearance of a king. It was there that the spirit of the Portuguese nation was extinguished. The sword of the old first king of Portugal, the reconquering vigor against the Moors, vanished along with the last and young king of Portugal. The weapon of the first king of the Burgundy dynasty, with the vigor of the last king of the Avis dynasty. It was as if the crusader spirit in the nation had disappeared. Nazarene of the desert, the last king, wielding the sword of the first, and both disappearing in foreign sands. So, for the sword to suddenly reappear after being forgotten was a way to keep the nation's hope alive again. Sebastião disappearing alone would just be an irresponsible king, lacking the mystique of the founder's weapon. Maybe Sebastião had even lost because he forgot the weapon. This is the weapon, which would be in Portugal, under the monk's guard. So, there were plenty of reasons to forge the weapon. It helped keep the fight and Portuguese spirit alive. Therefore, real or not, the sword at the Porto Museum holds much more significance than simply being the founder's sword. It was a breath of relief for those who were waiting for the restoration. That piece cannot be reduced to a copy of a lost sword. It represents the fighting spirit of Portugal's foundation and a symbol of national identity. Whether through the effort of the reconquest, if it is true, or through the effort to keep the flame of the kingdom's independence alive. If it's a copy, what do you think? Do you really think that King Afonso's sword, the one that's there, is the original, a faithful copy, or something completely different from the original? What surprised you the most? So, go ahead and leave your comment now to support our work and take the opportunity to become a member of the channel right now. That way, you'll be able to dive deeper and learn even more about the impressive Iberian history.